Hello, welcome to Soulprint Intuitive Tarot for March 25th. So, we have government officials in Texas saying that old people should just die. They should be sacrificing themselves for the youth. You have Trump having a wee bit of a fantasy about everything being up and running for Easter. And I saw just a bit of a clip of his sort of justification or his rationale. And he literally stood there with, that face of his saying, Easter is a very special time for me. I can't imagine how. I mean, unless he just has some sort of a fixation with either chocolate or bunnies, but it's certainly not a religious, meaningful time, because he wants to see the churches packed full of grateful and happy Americans on Easter Sunday. Now, I don't know who's going to burst his bubble, but that's probably not going to happen. And, already the White House is trying to scale that back by saying, well, that's just when we're going to look at starting, or, people who have had the virus and recovered, maybe they can go back to work. So as usual, he flapped his gums, and now the White House is trying to spin it into something that at least makes some sort of sense, which of course is an impossible thing to do when you're dealing with this man. But bless their hearts, they're going to try. So, so here we have it. I am recording this on Tuesday afternoon. So again, I have not heard about whether that bill has passed the Senate, but energetically, every indication is that it will, and that it's going to go ahead, and that it's going to prove or provide some relief. So let's hang on to that hope, shall we? So I want to take a look at just sort of what we can anticipate, right? Like, New Jersey apparently is now becoming like the second biggest hotspot in the country. New York is in dire situation. They need tens of thousands of ventilators, and apparently they were sent 400. Washington, California, you've got some really big areas that are really having a hard time. And above and beyond that, of course, then you have all of the smaller states that are also red zones and orange. And certainly the yellow zones in the country are being replaced by orange zones and so on. So I just want to take a look and see if we can get some sort of a read on what, as Americans, you can expect in the next coming, weeks and months. So, come on down, I have a question. So here we go. Let's take a look at, I think the question we're going to ask, I think is going to be about, not expectations, sort of, let's do it, reality, virus, US. Reality, virus, US. Reality, virus, US. There we go. Okay, so we're starting here from a place of secrecy, things not being clearly seen or understood. So that is not a surprise, because that is exactly what has been going on for weeks now. So there's more secrets that are going to come out. There's all kinds of stuff that is being hidden or spun or, half truths. And that's going to continue. You're going to continue to get that out of Trump. And unfortunately, it's going to continue to be broadcast over Fox News and other conservative type media situations. So you're going to continue to have that sort of interesting combination, of, you know, 70%, 75%, 80% of the country hearing one story, and 20, 25, maybe 30% of the rest of the country having a very, very different understanding of what is going on. And I don't actually see that changing until the numbers become so frightening that they cannot be disregarded. I have to tell you, when this started, I was doing some pendulum work, and it indicated that the death toll was going to be between 1 and 1.5 million. So those are really, really, really scary, scary numbers. And I'm not clear. I think that means globally, but I make no promises. So when things get really, really bad, that's when you're going to see a significant shift. But it's not going to really be a shift. It's going to be spin, right? It's going to be, well, of course we were taking this seriously all along. And of course we did this. And of course we did that. And of course, all of it is a big bag of lies. But for right now, in the immediate future, that's exactly, you're going to have this division within the country, and it's a lopsided division. Do not forget that. It's not a 50-50 split. And sometimes when we're thinking about Republicans and Democrats, we fall into that trap of thinking that they're equally divided in the country, and they so are not. You've got 70 to 80% of people who are getting their news accurately, who see Trump for what he is, and even if they like Trump, there are, percentages of people who are hearing the correct information and the correct story. But there's going to continue to be this sort of lopsided division where you have people who really believe one thing, and then other people who are getting the truth. And guess what? That's just going to cause this whole tower to come in. So again, and honestly, I'm not saying anything that you don't know. It's going to get considerably worse before it gets better. The problem is that in many ways, because we do not have a frame of reference for what is going on, there really is not any sort of clarity or understanding about what really bad actually looks like, what really hard times really look like. We're not able at this point to wrap our heads around literally the magnitude of this thing. And these are the people who are informed, okay? These are the people who are paying attention to the correct news and understand to some degree what's going on. There is almost an inability to really grasp because there's no frame of reference. There's just simply not. So, and that's going to be where, people are really, really going to start demanding answers from the U.S. political officials. I'm not convinced that they're going to get answers for the most part that satisfy them. This is such a colossal failure on the part of the Trump administration and to a very large degree Republicans. And I'm saying that broadly. I'm not just talking about the ones in the Senate or in the House. I'm talking about governors and mayors and like that in different parts of the country where they're really going to be reluctant to sort of step up and say, yeah, you know what, this is actually really serious. And probably what we're hearing from Trump is maybe more along the line of hopeful thinking as opposed to a clear reality of how this is going to unfold and what it's going to look like. Again, and I said this in my last reading, you have a president who is all about the money. Okay, he really is. Apparently, he was speaking to, maybe North Korea, and asking them for ventilators. That came through from that country's readout of the call. The U.S. readout of the call didn't mention anything about it. So, you know, he still continues to try to keep up this facade that everything is well. And, you know, come spring, come Easter, as the bunnies hip hop through the gardens, so are people going to be hip hopping themselves back to work. And I don't see that happening. He is going to really, really have to pull back from that. You know, in the next day or two, you're going to hear the spin on that, right? Well, you know, maybe we can let, you know, people who have been sick or, you know, young people who are, you know, have a lower chance of getting, I mean, they're going to start spinning this thing to sort of get themselves out of the rut that they have created with the spinning wheels of Trump's communication style. Yep. A lot of death. I'm sorry. And a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And it's going to come to a point where there's really going to be some clarity about what wasn't done. It's still not there yet. We're not there yet. We don't have enough information. And as horrible as the information is that we do have right now, it's almost in some ways the tip of the iceberg. So this is going to come crashing down on the heads of those who have perpetuated the myth. And that's going to include Fox News. It's going to include some of the more conservative and false, you know, radio stations, etc. It would not surprise me if, as things get worse, you're going to actually see people again reverting to that, you know, they're going to go after the sponsors and they're going to say, I will stop being your customer if you don't pull out. Either you force them to tell the truth without bias, or I'm not going to buy your products. I'm not going to support you. And then, you know what? Those poor companies that maybe are still managing to function or even to a limited capacity cannot afford to lose their customers. Because it's all become so restricted, right? So that may actually start to carry some real weight in terms of some of the fallacies being corrected and people taking a step back from the nonsense that they're spewing. It's a sad thing. It really is that right now your country is in a place where you have people in positions of power. You have people who are economists, people who are big business, corporation owners, who are literally saying, you either choose the country surviving or life. And really, like really, are all those lives that important? It's horrifying. It's absolutely horrifying. And that is the pressure that Trump is sort of reacting to. Because, and part of the reason he's reacting to it is because while the rest of us are horrified, rendered speechless by the cruelty and inhumanity of those kinds of statements, in Trump's world, this reflects what he thinks and feels. So where most people would say, oh my God, did you just hear what you said? That's incredibly evil, literally. He's like, yeah, I get it, man. This is, this is serious. Like, we got to get these companies up and running. Like, he just doesn't. He just doesn't. And he's not going to. Okay, he's just not going to. So, here he is. He's arrived, right? The good old King of Pentacles. And so this is kind of what's happening, right? He is going to continue to get news that he doesn't like. Those darn medical doctors and those scientists will just not get on board. And he's going to continue hearing things that just do not sit all that well with him because thank you very much. That's not what I want to hear. And so there's going to continue to be this sort of push and pull back and forth. But, the scientists and the doctors do not have a political affiliation. So they are going to continue speaking their truth. And he is going to, rail against it. But ultimately, it's going to keep coming out, right? The facts, the numbers. It's very hard to spin 400,000 cases. It's really hard to spin 60 or 70 or 80,000 deaths as this thing continues to unroll. So, in some ways it's going to be like a really, really confusing time. And you're going to have to be really, really mindful of making sure that you are getting the best information that you can get, because part of what's going to happen in the next short while is Trump is going, because, I've said this 100 times before, right? He is a one-trick pony. So as this thing continues to spiral, and as people will not get on board and play games, play his game his way with his ball, you're going to see him sort of trying to revert back to what has worked for him before. And what he is not understanding is this isn't political. This is a medical crisis. This is people's health. This is hospitals not being equipped, not having the staff, wall-to-wall people who are really, really sick. And of course, as the coronavirus count goes up, then all the other people who would typically be in the hospital, they are also going to, find their mortality rate goes up because there simply are not going to be all of the resources that are needed to sort of keep everything floating. So don't be surprised if you see him sort of reverting back to that even a more bombastic salesman approach. And, but what's going to happen is he's going to sort of end up standing on the stage by himself. And I mean that a bit more figuratively than I do literally, although the numbers of people standing behind him trying to keep their faces blank is also going to continue to decrease, because he is selling hope. He is selling spin. He is selling everything is going to be just fine. And people realize that that's not accurate, and people realize that's not going to happen. And everybody knows that by Easter, everything is not going to be turned back on, and the country is just going to carry on as if nothing happened. As I've said before, we cannot, and this is globally, this is not just about the United States, we at this point are actually pretty much incapable of understanding the change that this is going to bring in our lives in terms of what we knew before versus the reality as this thing finally abates. And, again, that's a bit of a jog down the road. And I'm still getting that sort of feeling that we're going to see a bit of a flattening out in the summertime. And then it's just going to roar back in the cold months. So let's all be grateful for government officials who are taking their jobs seriously, who are doing their best to get information out, who continue to do everything that they can and in their power to get people to understand the magnitude of what's going on, the seriousness of what's going on. And sometimes it almost is going to boil down to public shaming to get some of these government officials to toe the line and do what's right, as opposed to what Trump wants or what's expedient. So that's going to be sort of interesting to kind of watch that unfold as the criticism against officials who are not taking this seriously, who are not reacting appropriately, really, really does start to ramp up and increase. That's not something that they're going to like or enjoy. And that honestly, unfortunately, may be one of the components that goes into trying to get everybody reading the same book. I'm not even saying they have to be on the same page. It would just be nice if everybody had their hands on the same book, which at this point they don't. And there's going to be a lot of hurt, and there's going to be a lot of blame. There's going to be a lot of accusations. And, as bad as some public officials were before about shifting the blame and spinning and blaming others, they've been taught a whole, bag full of new tricks under Trump. And so they don't hesitate anymore to just flat lie. And most of them have failed to figure out that for some bizarre reason, in some ways, Trump is like Teflon, and a lot of this stuff just seems to slide off of him, but it doesn't slide off of them. And so you're going to see a lot of government officials at all levels really, really struggling to maintain their own image, struggling to try to keep things contained, because the news is coming at them faster and faster and faster, and they can't keep up. I mean, they literally are going to get to a point where they are no sooner going to finish, a press conference or an announcement, and literally 10 minutes later, that is old news because there's new numbers coming out. There's new crises to deal with. And at some point, it's just going to be like a state of absolute exhaustion sets in. And really, their inadequacies are going to start to really, really become so apparent that even people who are predisposed to support them are going to have to actually themselves make a few hard decisions. I know that there are some poll numbers that show that Trump his numbers are going up. I would not concern yourself with them. I really would not concern yourself with them. I'm not actually convinced that those numbers are accurate, and I'm not convinced that some of the questions or the way the questions are being asked can create kind of one of those, I don't know, false negatives or false positives, I guess they're called, where people really don't approve or they really don't like what they're seeing, but because of the way the question has been asked or the tones used, they're getting, a slightly more positive response. Don't get yourself wigged out about his numbers going up, because they're going to tank. Because again, it's all about the economy until it's not. Again, you've got powerful women stepping into place, taking roles, putting themselves forward, and, making things come together. The Queen of Swords typically is my Nancy Pelosi, and she's working very, very hard. But there are other women who are out there doing everything they can. Again, that divine feminine energy is going to continue to rise as the crisis gets bigger and bigger. And just while it's on my brain, for any of those of you who have not heard, on Monday night, Amy Klobuchar let it be known that her husband had not only tested positive. When he got tested, he went into self-isolation, but as of Monday, he was in the hospital with low oxygen levels of the blood. So take a moment and send a good thought or a prayer to her and her family. And in fact, while you're at it, send a thought and a prayer to all of those impacted and affected. So the government is going to be able to stand, okay? The government is not going to crumble in on itself. The administration, yeah, but not the government. Your government is going to be able to sustain the hits and the blows. But again, it was going to be a really big job cleaning up the mess that has been made in the last 3.5, 4 years. Imagine how much harder it is going to be to clean up that mess if there is still, that 19 around and prevalent. And the money that is being spent and how on earth you end up sort of trying to balance that and getting people back to work come, January 2021. So the government is going to stand, but Lord, it's going to be a little bit battered. So you have a sense here that certain government officials just believe if they hang on to the information, if they don't release it, if they don't let people know the actual truth, that somehow they're going to escape the worst of it. And what they're not understanding is that, in fact, is going to create the worst of it, because those people who depend on them for information, guidance, support, are going to literally be left out in the cold, and by extension, ultimately, so will the people who have lied to them be left out in the cold. Justice demands her say. And with the magician beside her, it's talking about tools in a toolkit, right? Having the different components necessary to bring things back together and start the healing. But anybody who is anticipating that when you heal, it's just going to look like it did maybe in, December or January, is going to be in for a really quite a big disappointment. Yeah, you know what? More stuff is going to come out. There's going to be more information coming out. And as it does, again, you're going to see that pulling away from what is coming out of the White House and what is coming out of the president's mouth, because more and more people are just simply going to understand that that's just not. The more comes to light, the more precarious is his situation. And frankly, the more delusional he becomes. So, sometimes it's better to know the worst of it then pretend that the worst of it isn't going to happen. And I kind of feel like maybe that's part of what this reading was about. It was about, listen, everybody keeps saying it's going to get bad before it gets better, but this is the information that is going to help you start moving forward and start sort of preparing yourself, understanding that as things get bad, you don't give up hope, because things are going to recover and they are going to get better. And frankly, for a whole lot of people, they have been waiting a really, really long time for the energy of the planet as a whole and the attitudes of the planet as a whole to get a little bit shook up and smarten up and start figuring out what actually is important versus what we're being told is important, or what government officials tell us are important, or certainly what rich people tell us is important. So now, okay, it is sad that the shaking up had to come in this form, but perhaps drastic times, drastic measures. Hang in there. We're going to get through this, and we're going to get through it together. Keep your thoughts positive and hopeful. Take care. Be well. And wash your hands. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.